QIMR Berghofer acknowledges the traditional and cultural custodians of the lands, waters and seas across Queensland, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. We support the cultural knowledge, determination and commitment of First Nations communities in caring for health and well-being for millennia.
Welcome to QIMR Berghofer's 80th anniversary podcast. I'm Claire Blake, and we're celebrating 8 decades of bold ideas, real science, and the brilliant men and women who made it happen. We did start in a leaky old army hut, and now we're tackling cancer, decoding the brain, tracking infectious diseases, and rewriting what's possible in medicine. We'll dive into the true stories, funny, messy, inspiring, from the people who made it all happen, and those carrying the torch into the future, because science isn't just labs and data, it's human, and it's happening right here. Well, we're celebrating the 80th anniversary with Professor Georgia Chenevix-Trench today, a career spanning nearly 4 decades here, distinguished scientist, leads the Cancer Genetics Lab. Georgia, you have changed our understanding of the genetic factors influencing breast and ovarian cancers, advanced the development of personalised screening, and Georgia, too many awards and accolades, but a few: the Suzanne Corrie Medal from the Australian Academy of Science, the GSK Award for Research Excellence, and of course a Fellow of the Australian Academy of Science, and continues to be a leading voice in cancer research. Now, you have been here. Is it almost half the time that QIMR has been around?
Almost exactly. It'll be 40 years next July.
Have you got a distinct memory of your first day?
Yes. Shocking. We'd come straight from the States. We stayed in the nurses' quarters, which were beside the swimming pool up there in RBH. We came into this small, very friendly institute, but we still thought, oh my God, what have we done? We'd come from a good department in the US, but Australia seemed so far away. There was, of course, no email, there was no fax. International phone calls were prohibitive. I walked into an institute where I think I was the only person who'd ever isolated RNA, and I didn't think I was particularly good at doing that. It wasn't at all clear who I was going to work with, what I was going to work on. And I remember going back to our room one afternoon, partly from jet lag, and just falling asleep and thinking, this is a nightmare, what are we going to do? But the then director, Chev Kitson, was extremely helpful. Everything you wanted, he gave you. He was incredibly enthusiastic and energetic. He was incredibly supportive of women scientists. And so within, a matter of weeks, we'd worked out we really liked Brisbane. Within a matter of months, we'd decided that there was potential and we should stay. When we very first came, we thought it'd be a stepping stone to somewhere in Sydney or Melbourne or Adelaide, but we gave up looking for opportunities there soon after we came. I just decided to stay and enjoy it and make the most of it.
That seemed to happen pretty quickly.
Well, it was partly Chev's support and enthusiasm, partly because I got my first QCF grant at a time when you only had to put DNA and cancer in the same sentence just about, and people gave you money. It was then because John Mattick came to Brisbane and started what's now the IMB, and that attracted a lot of good people and really changed the science culture here and got a lot of investment from state government. It was partly other people at QIMR, like Adele Green, who was very welcoming and helpful. Kay Elam, who's the deputy director, who I did some work with in the early days. A lot of it, to be honest, was because we liked living in Brisbane. We decided it was worth trying to stay and improve things.
You talk about the women that were there at the time. Was that different to other research facilities in terms of supporting women?
Well, I can't speak to that specifically because I wasn't anywhere else. But yes, we've always had a lot of female researchers, particularly in genetics and public health. But Chev was really remarkable, way ahead of his time. He saw the value of attracting couples when he wanted one member and would support the other as a bet, which is what he did with us. He was trying to recruit Nick and he threw in a position for me. And I think there are other couples he did that for. When I was pregnant the first time in 1988, I said to him, Chev, what about maternity leave? And he just winked and said, you'll be working from home, won't you? And so he kept paying me all the way through that leave, although for my first child I didn't do much work at home. By the time I had my second child, there was an official maternity leave policy. So it was back in 1991, and I think I was the first person to take that. And I suspect we were way ahead of our time, probably. I think Chev was just quite remarkable. And that tradition then continued with Michael, under whom we...
Michael Good,
under whom we established the arrangement with the Butterfield Childcare Centre, because at that time there was a real shortage of childcare places, particularly for babies, and we had many discussions about what we should do and whether we should build our own childcare centre or... And then we realised we weren't in the business of running childcare centres. Then Derek Richards, with his wife, who was working here at the time, and he had to take off a lot of paternity leave, despite the fact he was trying to get a paper revised for Nature. He had the good suggestion that we approach the centre on Butterfield Street and came to an arrangement whereby when they had a baby vacancy, we would pay for that vacancy for a matter of weeks or months until there was a new QIMR baby ready to go in. And I don't know that it cost us very much, but it really took the pressure off parents finding childcare for new babies. But then the other thing that I think is absolutely unique, Frank Gannon approved very quickly, was the idea of a mother's bonus for women who have children before the age of high school at the faculty and senior postdoc level, who can apply for a bonus that's sort of roughly 5 to 10% of their salary. And they can either take that as personal income and pay tax, or they can take it as lab income and use it in the lab. The most important thing is that you can fill in the application form in less than a minute. And when I proposed that, the only comment that Frank made was, do we need to go all the way to high school? And I said yes, because until kids go to high school and come home on the bus, it's usually the mothers who are worrying about picking them up or organising after-school care or whatever. And bang, that was done.
You mentioned a few people who inspired you here. Is there one in particular whose work you were so glad to be so close to?
Look, I've collaborated with lots of people in the Institute across the time. Probably Kumkum Khanna and I had one of the best collaborations when we did a lot of work on the ATM gene and showed that it's truly a breast cancer predisposition gene. That was a very good collaboration, and we had several program grants together after that. The people I work with at the moment are fantastic. Juliet, Stacey, Joanna, Tracy, Mandy. We all have very similar interests. We're all at work nearly every day. None of this work from home stuff. That continues to provide lots of pleasure.
Was it easier back then to get things done?
Yeah, it was much easier. First of all, success rates with NH&MRC were 20, 25, 20%. And I always thought even back then they shouldn't be more than about 30%. More than that were probably projects not worth funding. And you could tell people with confidence that if they worked hard, they may not get their grant the first year, but if they didn't get it the second year, they'd get it the third year. And with funding level as they are now, you can't say that so much. So that was a huge difference. And in terms of all the paperwork, I mean, my first consent form for getting bloods from people with Gorlin syndrome, it was 1 page. It had about 4 dot points. Basically said, I consent to giving blood for medical research. I might bruise, and if I want to change my mind later, I'll let you know. That was it.
Can you imagine?
And to be honest, it was no worse than the current 20 pages, which people don't read, don't remember. I think it's just another example of the world gone mad.
And the time frame, I imagine, went from quite short to now. Ethics can take such a long time.
Well, actually, one of the things that's been fantastic about QIMR is our ethics committee, our human ethics committee in particular, has been really remarkable. Had Ian Wilkie, God bless him, chair it for a very long time, and they were incredibly supportive, incredibly hardworking, and I think it's been one of the real blessings of being here at QIMR.
Is there something in the early years about QIMR Berghofer that you think people might be surprised to know that?
I don't know if they'd be surprised to know that I think that for at least the first 20 years here, it was a much smaller and incredibly convivial place. There was very little in the way of personal animosity. There was a real sense, I think, as there has been in Brisbane, that we're, a bit on the edge of what was happening, and we needed to stick together rather than compete. I think it was actually quite an advantage being in Brisbane in that sense. I think other bigger medical research centres have spent a lot more time bitching about each other and competing. So it's been a positive.
There must have been unexpected moments, failures, funny moments, things that happen in the lab.
And mostly not repeatable. There are a lot of failures in science, and you really need stamina to survive those. But there are highlights that compensate. And I've always said you need to have a 3-part portfolio, things that are super safe, guaranteed to give you a publication, albeit something kind of dull, something sort of middle ranking that might be better than that, and then some really risky, exciting project that will likely fail, but if it succeeds, it'll give you a paper in Nature and change the world. As a lab head, you can try to do that. Of course, as a postdoc, that's not so easy. You'll probably put on a single project or mostly on a single project, and you may be in any one of those categories.
You mentioned all the staff and the people you collaborate with now, and it's
Mhm.
obviously pretty hard to find, I imagine.
Yes, I think that's where the growth of genetics at the Institute has been such a success. And in fact, in terms of surprise, it might surprise people to know that when we came in 1986, there was virtually no human genetics here. And, thanks largely to Nick Martin's efforts, this has become absolutely an Australian and even a world centre in quantitative genetics with a focus on particularly mental health and cancer, but also other things like eye diseases. So it's been very satisfactory to see that grow. It's very sad we no longer have a genetics department, but many of those people are still here.
And the Nick Martin you mentioned just happens to be the Nick that you arrived with and your husband.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
have you ever collaborated on?
Oh, yes. In the early days, actually, we had a project on cleft lip and palate with Adele Green. I collaborated on his very early work on the genetics of twinning. I sort of ran his wet lab for quite a short time. And there are sort of random papers more recently where we're both part of big collaborations that we end up on together, but we haven't collaborated closely. Well, I might have almost as many papers with my daughter as I do with my husband, because she is now a geneticist at the Sanger Centre in England. Small collaborations together.
That must be exciting.
Yeah, it's fun.
And that's another thing that would have changed. I imagine when you said when you came here there was only telex, has that really changed and helped?
That happened with email. That completely changed the way we work. Much of the work we do these days is with huge international collaborations, sometimes with 100 other groups, and there's absolutely no way that could have been done before the internet. The first international collaboration I had looking for the gene for Gorlin syndrome in the early 90s, there were 5 international groups, 2 in Brisbane, 1 in Sweden, 2 in the US. We communicated by fax mostly. Almost the first email I got was from one of those collaborators telling me that he thought they found the first mutation in the gene we'd been looking for. Email totally transformed that.
Is AI as big a leap?
Don't know. Too soon to tell, probably. But, the internet really allowed us to do, as I say, things you couldn't have done before. AI possibly just makes it easier and faster. You might get to the same place more slowly without it.
How did you recruit participants? Was it through the newspaper?
Well, the first project I had was an interesting one. It was looking for the gene for this inherited skin cancer, a syndrome called Gorlin syndrome. And so these people get a lot of skin cancers, cysts in their jaw, childhood brain tumors. And I recruited those really by writing to dentists, oral surgeons, and to plastic surgeons and dermatologists all around the country. And then once I had the contact details, everyone was very enthusiastic. This was back in the early 90s. I actually flew around the country meeting these people, diagnosing them, taking blood from them, because although I wasn't a clinical geneticist, my training in the US had involved quite a lot of clinical genetics. So I had enough knowledge that I could measure people's heads, examine them, blah, blah, blah. And we found that gene thanks to a small family that we identified in Cairns that really helped us locate the gene. Almost 40 years later, I was still getting inquiries from clinical geneticists around the country saying, do you remember As patient you messengered them, do you have any more insights about their mutation, blah, blah, blah. That was a really interesting project.
I'm picturing you on a plane with
Little tiny flights I took to Geraldton and to Charleville, and don't even have a memory now of how I booked those flights. I mean, certainly wasn't on the internet.
No.
Did anyone check that I was able to take blood? I suppose somebody checked my skills before I set off. But
And it all arrived safely? No.
Oh, no, that was all fine. That
Yeah.
was fine. And, I was barely 30 by then. I was just past 30, I guess.
Was it hard to interest younger scientists in genetics then? Were they more interested in...
No, genetics has been one of the booming sciences from the 80s. Never difficult.
How did you get interested?
Oh, biology teacher at school, and a very, very, very influential tutor at university who actually had influence on a lot of people around the world, including some people who are now in Brisbane. Just totally charismatic and inspiring.
How would you think that the Institute has shaped medical research in Australia, because it's really come to the forefront?
Well, I would say this, wouldn't I? In terms of genetics, I think it's had huge influence, and people who trained here are now in institutes all over the country. I think it's been really instrumental there, certainly in public health and skin cancer research, where it's had enormous public health implications, and I'm sure others would pick on other things.
When you think of your first few months at QIMR Berghofer, what were the major challenges apart from the obvious, moving to a new country?
Well, certainly things like getting reagents, getting samples from overseas. That was a huge deal, even more difficult and expensive than it is now. Picking up skills that are now, regarded as very routine, because there were so few people in Brisbane on the Institute doing molecular biology. There were very few people to learn from. In fact, I went down to Canberra once to learn how to do a particular technique with a person who developed it down there, and a technique now that people do with their eyes shut. I think being in a small place did make for extra challenges, and you couldn't look on Google to get advice, and you could read a paper that was published a year ago, but that was really quite tricky. And that's really transformed, I suppose, in the last 15 years when, we've invested very heavily in equipment here, and most of the state-of-the-art techniques that you need access to, you can do here and get good advice. That's an economy of scale.
What sort of equipment did you use then that would astonish people now?
I don't know about astonish people, but we did a lot of work with radioactive substances. I mean, radiation safety was a big deal back then, which we just don't use anymore. That's been completely replaced. And the safety issue, that was a big deal. There was always a lot of concern about radioactive contamination and maintaining the right standards. And that's something that's really changed dramatically. And when I first came, polymerase chain reaction had just been invented. So I think the paper came out the year we left. We had a very, perfectly nice but very lazy technician in the lab whose job is, so for PCR you need to change temperature between 3 different temperatures. And these days, of course, a machine does that. But in those days, he had 3 water baths, and he'd sit all day with a stopwatch moving his tubes from one to the other every 35 or 40 seconds, which was quite enough excitement for him. But I can't remember when we got the first PCR machine. I think Peter Upcroft was probably really instrumental there. And we probably had our first machine within a year or 2.
Pipettes have changed a bit. Did you suck on the end of a pipette?
Yeah, and I certainly had a rubber bulb on the end of them. I don't think I sucked on them, but I'm sure other people did. And people did do that all the time. And to be honest, I don't think we had any more adverse health effects than we have now. I mean, I don't think anyone got radiation poisoning or any other kind of poisoning. I don't think we're any safer now than we were back then.
How did you find jobs, and how did researchers find jobs?
I guess in the newspaper. I mean, Nick found this one in the back of Nature, just flicking through Nature on a cold winter's afternoon in Richmond and seeing it. So definitely through the print. And there were lovely things about being such a small institute back then. Everyone went down for coffee at about the same time. There's a lot of things you lose as you get bigger, which can't be helped. But there was a really terrific atmosphere and incredible camaraderie.
Your passion for breast cancer has been so obvious your whole career, and you've been instrumental in changing the way things work, and screening you're very passionate about. Do you still have that passion?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I plan to close my lab at the end of this year, which I've always planned because my investigator grant will come to an end. But I absolutely want to keep involved, particularly in the international things that I do. We're trying to write a very large grant at the moment that would really make use of that consortium. So yes, I think I'm just as interested. I just don't want to run a lab myself anymore.
What's your own personal plans?
Grandchildren, gardening, travel.
Sounds like bliss. It's been a real thrill to talk to you, Georgia. Some great stories there, and it's been such a long and successful career.
Absolutely. No, it's been really fantastic 40 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.